Today, more people than ever are suffering from long COVID because of the wave of infections in the last 2 to 3 years. Long COVID symptoms are plentiful. Lethargy, constant fatigue, shortness of breath, brain fog, loss of concentration, loss of memory, anxiety, depression, and so much more. Long COVID is when people exhibit persistent symptoms even after they test negative after their COVID infection. It can be very crippling. It is thought that anywhere from 30 to 50% of the people who do get COVID end up suffering from long COVID. But still, we haven't made much headway into understanding why. However, because of the large number of patients today, there is some data available. So more and more studies are coming out with data about long COVID now, and this is something that is going to prove to be very challenging to manage for the next few years. A new study has now discovered biomarkers of the virus in the bloodstream of people who suffer from long COVID months and months, in fact a year after they tested negative. Other studies have found other factors as well. Long COVID is scientifically called post-acute sequelae of COVID-19 or PASC or sometimes PAX. It has been clinically documented since a few weeks after the pandemic began, and studies into patients suffering persistent symptoms have been steadily finding newer and newer indicators that could explain the phenomenon of long COVID. In the latest, scientists from Massachusetts have found the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein in the blood plasma of those who are suffering from long COVID. It was not a very large study. There were a total of 63 people, of which 39 had been diagnosed with long COVID. Of these, 30 were women. This is unsurprising as other studies have shown that women are more prone to having persistent COVID symptoms. Those who had long COVID did not necessarily have a severe COVID infection, and vice versa. Among those 26 who did not have long COVID, 10 had been admitted to the ICU when they were sick and 7 had been intubated. In those 37 who did have long COVID, the researchers measured the concentration of the SARS-CoV-2 known antigens. These included the 3 big ones, the S1 subunit of the spike protein, the full-length spike protein, and the nucleocapsid protein. The researchers looked for these 3 antigens in the blood plasma. They found that 65% of the patients had one of the 3 in measurable quantities several months afterwards, in fact up to 12 months after infection. Spike protein was the most common one and was found in 60% of the patients. By contrast, in the bodies of those who did not have persistent symptoms, there was no part of the virus detected. But all the patients had all 3 in detectable levels during the course of their infection when they originally tested positive. And these antigens were also not vaccine induced. The findings offer evidence that the spike protein primarily is still present in the blood of people with long COVID. They detected this multiple times in all of the patients who tested positive for these antigens at multiple times from 2 to 12 months from infection. Those who had long COVID symptoms and persistent symptoms were tending to show evidence of the proteins in their blood plasma, primarily the spike protein. These patients have COVID-like symptoms and also a specific set of other symptoms that manifest in various levels of severity. The most common ones are, of course, excessive fatigue and just tiredness, shortness of breath, and neurological symptoms like brain fog, inability to concentrate and understand things and remember things, insomnia, depression, and anxiety. Other than these, there are a various range of symptoms including chest pain, fever, digestive issues, could be diarrhea, loss of smell or taste, muscle and joint pain, the onset of heart disease and diabetes. Studies have shown that long COVID patients' brains are often affected by the spike protein, and this leads to the death of neurons, resulting in hampered cognition and increased anxiety. Other studies have shown that long COVID leads to persistent inflammation and changes in the olfactory system, so smell and taste. The same part of the brain that processes smell and taste is also involved in processing emotion and learning, and changes here results in behavioral changes and mood disorders which manifest as symptoms of long COVID. In fact, recent studies have shown that long COVID brain scans are similar to early stages of Alzheimer's or Parkinson's in terms of how the imagery looks. It's of course highly bothersome that more and more studies are showing that even mild cases could go on to become long COVID cases. In the lungs, even if patients have had just a mild case, there seems to be extensive damage that COVID causes. The movement of oxygen from the alveolar membrane, which is at the tip of our lungs, into the red blood cells seem to have come down in a lot of patients who suffer from long COVID. COVID is also considered to be a vascular disease. The virus targets the cells that line the heart and induce cardiac problems. And there is just so much more. The list goes on and on. Most of us who are vaccinated are worrying less about the virus today than we did 2 years ago. But the fact is that even with a mild infection, the body takes a very heavy hit, even when symptoms of the illness at the time aren't really bad. But where does the virus stay in the body such that the immune system isn't getting to it and destroying it? Some experts speculate that organs like the intestines could act as reservoirs in our body that enable the virus to persist without getting attacked. So who is at an increased risk of developing long COVID? Some studies have shown some indicators. If there are multiple symptoms, not necessarily more severe symptoms, just multiple symptoms, there is an increased risk of long COVID. This could be because of autoantibodies that attack our own body's internal systems when the COVID response is triggered. A higher viral load during infection is thought to be a suspect as well. Having type 2 diabetes is a big risk for long COVID, and having a dormant Epstein-Barr infection or the common herpes virus in the system also increases the risk. Of course, women seem to be more prone to getting long COVID, and the risk is definitely the highest in those who are unvaccinated. Recently, there was a study that indicated that repeated infections are more severe than less severe, and with each reinfection, the risk of long COVID hospitalization and death goes up. The study has been criticized for its methodology and the things that it compares, but the effect of repeated reinfections on the risk of long COVID are yet to be understood. There are increasing number of studies being funded for understanding long COVID. Today and over the coming few months, we are expected to learn more and more about it. Meanwhile, we continue taking our precautions of masking and distancing and of course getting our vaccine shots.